Silent type, eh? I once knew a boy like you. Never said a word. Very taciturn. Well, I said to him, there's no point in talking if you've got nothing to say. Did well in the end, though. Name of Shakespeare. Ever read any Shakespeare? Countess?
A little. Hamlet. First draft.
What? It's been missing for centuries.
It's quite genuine, I assure you.
I know. I recognize the handwriting.
Shakespeare's.
No, mine. He sprained his wrist writing sonnets. Wonderful stuff. To be or not to be, that's the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles. Take arms against a sea of troubles. That's a mix. I told him that was a mixed metaphor, and he would insist.
Hello and welcome to the Tin Dog Podcast. In this episode I'll be mostly talking about the latest episode of Doctor Who, being the Shakespeare Code. But of course, before I get to that point, I need to do a few bits of bookkeeping. Well, let's first start off by thanking everyone who's actually sent me some feedback. Huzzah! I got some. I actually got quite a bit. So I will now stop complaining, but I will give you my email address if anyone wants to send any more. It's tin, that's T-I-N, hyphen, dog, D-O-G, at hotmail.co.uk. Oh, I'd also like to thank the person who sent me a script for Doctor Who. It's very nice, but I haven't opened it because I like to think of myself as a bit of a writer, and I know there's a whole exciting world of breach of copyright. So I'm sorry, but that file was instantly deleted because I don't ever want to run the risk of writing a Doctor Who story and having someone come up to me at a convention and going, you know, I sent you a text file or something like that. So thank you very much for sending me that, but I am not going to be reading it for reasons which I've just gone into. Right. The episode this week, well, the Shakespeare Code, obvious references to a certain, book by Mr. Brown in the title, but not actually in the story itself. Mind you, though, there is a whole code thing going on with City of Death, but let's not go there just yet. Let's look at the story. Now, story-wise, you've got quite a nice little linear narrative. You've got episode 2 of a new season. The way it's filmed, always looking good in the second episode. But let's deal with the plot first. Plot-wise, you've got the new companion, Martha, and her apparent only trip out. Well, you know that's not going to happen. But anyway, they land in Elizabethan England in 1599. Now, it's very important that this is the year before Hamlet's written, which means the City of Death reference that you've just heard at the beginning of this programme, where the Fourth Doctor says he worked with Shakespeare writing Hamlet, can still work on the canonicity front. I'm not completely sure about the canonicity of the other Shakespeare references, things like and the Big Finish story, Kingmaker, which I heartily recommend, and I will review at some point. Oh, on the subject of which, I know I'll be rambling, I know I'm staying off the beaten track, but I will be reviewing various stories, and some of my favourites, in depth, once this series is finished. I'll also be looking in much more depth at some of the Doctor's times, the previous Doctors, overviews and themes, if I can find any, and a lot of other things. But anyway, this week we're definitely talking about the Shakespeare Code. Is it a good story? I would say so. Obviously, there's some little moments where you suddenly go, oh, really? Are you sure? Tiny things like Expelliarmus being used to get rid of the aliens. But of course, I've jumped to the end of the plot. That's just like me, really, isn't it? So, they arrive in Elizabethan England. They go to catch a play at the Globe Theatre. If anyone lives in England who's listening, they all know of the Globe Theatre, and of course they know of the rebuilt Globe in London, which of course they used in the very, very long Doctor Who Confidential. 45 minutes it was. That's enormously long. But anyway, I liked this week's story. It had Shakespeare, it had witches, which are two of my favourite things. I mean, let's face it, I worked for 6 years in a theatre. One has to like Shakespeare on some level. After they arrive in Elizabethan England, they do the standard wandering around, getting involved, and then of course they find out about the existence of a sequel to Love Labour's Lost, called Love Labour's Won, which was going to be the original title of the story, until somebody pointed out the whole Dan Brown thing. After that you end up with a nice little let's meet the historical characters, which admittedly Doctor Who hasn't done for a while, honest. And then we move on to a very nice little run around. Oh, there's witches. Oh, they're not really witches. Oh, they're monsters. Doctor loses one of his hearts, then he gets it back. Martha tries it on with the Doctor and fails miserably. More mentions of Rose. It's all fairly pedestrian stuff, but it is very, very well executed. It's definitely a good introduction for a lot of people. For example, someone at my current place of work who had never ever seen Doctor Who, but was aware of my fandom, pointed out after last week's episode that they had absolutely no idea what was going on and why there was rhinos and what was going on at all. This week's episode, I feel, is a lot more accessible. It does have some minor problems. For me, why bother to mention Back to the Future? I mean, to be fair, some of the kids watching the series now won't even have seen Back to the Future. And isn't it a 15 certificate? But that's not important. I mean, I know it's shown on TV quite a lot. I did like the story, I must admit. I, wish there was something I could gripe or rant or rave about. But to be honest, there wasn't much. Even the Doctor's amount of apologising was cut to a minimum. Again, no mentions of Mr. Saxon. There is, however, one thing I must say at this point. Because I'm recording this in the week before episode 3.3 airs, I must point out to everyone that 3.3 might not actually air this Saturday at all. It might be delayed a week, all because of a sporting event. Yes, some form of FA Cup. I believe it's an important sporting event for a lot of people. Do you remember the Olympics in 1984? Yes, well, we all know the mess that made of the season then. But it's nice to see the BBC have returned back to their standardised system of, yes, we're desperately going to show this whenever we want, and it's always in the right place, except, of course, when it doesn't happen, and so on. Last year, they were good about this. Last year, they did cancel the news in favour of showing Doctor Who on time, which is, of course, a good thing. But you never know. So hopefully there will be a decisive victory by one team or another, I don't actually care which, and then we'll get to see the new episode. The new episode, of course, has the face of Bo in it, and Ardal O'Hanlon out of Father Ted. If you're an American viewer and you're unfamiliar with Father Ted, I suggest you track it down. If, however, you're an American viewer and you have access to My Hero, also with Ardal O'Hanlon, I suggest you track down Father Ted and don't watch My Hero. My Hero is, of course, Mork and Mindy, but with a cape. Of course, that's more for next week. I'm ahead of myself. I must say I enjoyed this week's episode. There were some moments. The Harry Potter references, not really that necessary. The trip to Bedlam, quite well done, but I'm sure the Bethlehem Hospital really could do with a reinvention of itself at some point. But then again, can you really make a lunatic asylum politically correct? Either way, I'll call an end to this particular review and let you get on. I'd like to thank everyone who's now listening and everyone who's bothered to go to iTunes and subscribed. Thank you very, very much. I am surprised by my listenership figures. And if anyone has any questions or anything like that, please feel free to email me, and I'll speak to you soon. Oh, and just before I go, one more thing. Anyone who downloaded last week's show and discovered it was only 9 minutes long instead of 11, can you please go back, delete it, and reload it, on the grounds that it was my fault. I uploaded the wrong file. I am quite new to this podcasting log, so sorry about that. So just delete the review of Smith & Jones, and then reload the review of Smith & Jones, and it should all be marvellous. Thank you very much. Be seeing you.